On this episode of ResiWeek, Access Networks has a new CEO, remote work, as well as LG's new QNED. All this and more on this episode of ResiWeek.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
This is ResiWeek, episode 258, Longer Runways.
Support for AVNation is brought to you by Access Networks.
Welcome to this episode of ResiWeek. This is your weekly roundup of all the latest news and stories for the residential AV industry. I'm your host, Matthew Scott for AVNation.tv. And this week, we are pleased to be joined by my good friend, Bryce Nordstrom. He is the new CEO of Access Networks. How you doing, Bryce?
I'm good. How about you?
I am doing fantastic. Just a little housekeeping before we jump in. We're going to chat with Bryce real quickly about some cool changes that are going on at Access Networks, and then we're going to jump into the panel. So stick around, of course, after we talk to Bryce. We're going to kick this off as I alluded to into your introduction. Bryce is the new CEO over at Access. So first of all, congratulations, my friend.
Thank you.
That's a fantastic thing. For both you and for the company. Give us a little backstory for anybody who maybe hasn't interfaced with you yet, or doesn't know a ton about Access Networks.
Sure. So, I mean, my personal experience has been I've been kind of in the AV industry for the last, I guess it's been residential now. It's been 14, 15 years. Before that, I was in car audio. There's a lot of guys out there like me that started out in car audio and decided that they wanted to make a little bit bigger paycheck because there's definitely more money on this side of the fence than there is in car audio. But outside of that, you know, I've been with Access for a little over 7 years now, coming up on 8 years. And with Access Networks, you know, we're a provider of residential network equipment and products and services, and have been doing that since 2006, 2007, somewhere in there. Yeah. So that was Hagai Feiner, who was the CEO until just recently, and he started the company and now is the president and the founder of, and the big vision behind Access Networks. So yeah, it's been a great ride.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute, because, you know, obviously you and I have chatted quite a lot over the years. We do a lot of interviews at a lot of the different shows with you, so you're no stranger to our audience by any means. Making a transition into a role that was held by Hagai, who, let's be honest, he's a big personality. He's a big guy just in general. Those are big shoes to fill. How do you go about making that transition, and, you know, not only doing that internally with the other members of the company, but also externally to all of your dealers and all of your industry partners, and making a seamless transition?
Seamless is probably a little bit aggressive. I mean, to have no seam in there was going to be difficult. You know, it's something that Hagai and I talked about 2.5 years ago. He was actually doing my review, and he asked me where I thought I wanted to be in a couple years, 3 years, and I turned it around on him and I said, "Where do you want to be?" And he was taken aback by that because he never really thought about it. I don't think he'd always just, you know, I'm going to be the owner, I'm going to be the CEO for the rest of the time, and that is what it is. And I think when I asked him that question, because I told him I wanted to be CEO at that point. And I think when I asked him that question, he just kind of the wheels started turning, like, what else would I like to do? What else could I do? And we started laying that groundwork pretty soon after that was a possible transition that would happen at some point. There wasn't any time frame put on it or anything like that. There was no, you know, like, hey, you know, this date we're going to do this, and this date we're going to do that, and so on and so forth. It was just, if it works out and it makes sense, then that's where we'll end up. And, you know, Hagai has a lot of really big ideas and comes up with some pretty, you know, he really has a pulse of the market, and just kind of understands what people are looking for. And a lot of people at Access Networks have that same kind of ability, but then when it came down to actually executing things, you know, I was the sales guy. I had to move the sales number, right? I had to move everything forward, figure out how to to get that move forward. So when somebody comes to you and says, I have this idea, my brain starts working about, okay, how do we implement that? How do we get it done? How do we move that in? And luckily, there's a bunch of other people at Access Networks that work the same way. And I had started taking more of that role outwardly facing for the company of bringing new products, of being the spokesperson about who Access Networks is, what our position is, what the products that we do, what our services are, those kind of things. And so it was just kind of this natural transition of, I'll just come up with some big ideas every now and then you go figure out how to make it all work. And so that's kind of where we're at now. And, I think he's happy to be able to take on some other initiatives that he has in his life. And I'm happy to embrace this role and see where we go next.
Now, I want to get into some of those kind of growth opportunities and market side of things for a second. But just before we do, one of the things with, somebody like Haggai being involved so much and being that figurehead, how do you go through, working with someone who has been obviously the boss for so long and making that move to, coming up from where you were in the sales role to then being a part of those conversations and being a part of those ideas?
I think it's the explicit trust that he's put in me. Okay. And that trust wasn't just external. That was an internal message that he has been working on for a while. When we would have business discussions or discussions about, where we're heading or what we're doing, a lot of times he and I would be very locked up and in sync from day one. We see things very vividly the same way. And I think the internal message has always been, this is what we're going to do, and Bryce is going to help us get there. And then there was a lot of things that I pushed the envelope on. The other thing that I'm not afraid and never have been afraid to do is talk to him like another owner, because I've been an owner of other companies. Yeah. And so that's a little bit different for some business owners to actually have somebody that actually comes up to them as an owner, even though they're not, and says what they think. There's probably a dozen times over the years where I've said, okay, I'm going to say this to him, and I may not have a job tomorrow. So, it's wearing it, it's being open and honest and wearing it all out there and believing in what you're saying. So
that's a huge part, though, to be able to take ownership without being an owner. Right. And that's something that you don't rarely see, which is fantastic. And, I applaud you for that. Let's talk for a second about growth. This is the thing I've loved about Access Networks, following you guys for so long. And I'm trying to think back to when I first met Haggai and how long ago that was. And I want to say it was really early. It was a couple of the first, if not the first, CD Expo that they exhibited at. You guys as a company have really kind of developed this internet IT base that the industry's latched onto, right? I know there's other vendors and I'm not trying to take anything away from them, but you guys really push that envelope heavily. As the industry continues to push really heavily on and lean on infrastructure, where does that put you guys? Where does that put Access Networks, and what's the future for Access Networks look like?
Yeah, so every 2 or 3 years, probably we look at the market and we go, okay, well, there's this technology coming and maybe that ends our runway. Maybe there's this technology coming, maybe that ends our runway. And the reality is that none of them really do. They all make the runway longer. And we are just scratching, as an industry, we are just scratching the surface of security services. Yeah. Security as a service to residential to residential end users. And that's something that, we've got an offering out there. We've got multiple in the pipeline that are revolving around that. And it's such an untapped potential in our industry. And the biggest issue that we see moving forward is convenience versus security. And that's always going to be a problem on the residential side. People at their businesses, they don't, they're only there 8 hours a day or 9 hours a day. They don't mind being a little bit inconvenienced because of some security measures that somebody put in place. But when they go home, what they want is convenience. They want that ultimate convenience. They want to be able to just, turn it on and go and not worry about, approving this or worrying about this not downloading or that not opening or those kind of things. And so that's the thing that's going to take some time for our industry, is to really fine tune that stuff and actually do it with a level of security that is robust enough to protect you. Because there's lots of little things out there that you can do to, URL filtering and those kind of things. And,
Right.
And those things are out there now, but the problem is that they're not really protecting you from the threats that are available, that are out there now, that are so much more complex and complicated and more aggressive than you would ever believe. You talk to some of these companies that really protect Fortune 500 type companies, and the stuff that they're seeing out there is just insane. I mean, look at this last thing that we saw in the news with SolarWinds. These are very, very smart people behind these attacks, and that will eventually happen in the residential space. There will eventually be somebody that gets accessed in a way that it ruins lives and those kind of things. And so what we're really trying to do is we're really trying to get ahead of that curve, right? We're really trying to get ahead of that curve and figure out, how can we apply what they're applying to the residential or to the commercial space and to the enterprise space, but do it in a way that still allows some kind of convenience to it. And
Is that? Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's not something where you just flip a switch and now it works. It's something that's going to be a learned process. And that's where we think there's a huge potential there in the market, on top of all of the new technologies that are coming out, behind Wi-Fi and the devices that are being added to the market.
Is that arguably the toughest hurdle right now in the industry, is how to? I remember years ago, you and I talked about the advent of commercial grade appliances, essentially, in network terms, coming into the home, and how there was occasionally pushback on that because, well, we don't need that massive, Cisco switch or access network switch or whatever it is at the time. Is the security that type of conversation as well, where it's arguably, I would agree with you, it's probably the biggest potential, but it's also maybe the hardest avenue to go down. It'll be met with the most resistance. Yeah,
it is. There's some things that are working in our favor right now, specifically work from home.
Mm-hmm.
That's exposing a lot of weaknesses on residential networks and what the attack vectors are that are available now. I mean, take your business that was centrally located and there was 500 people in an office building, and take all of those 500 people and put them in their houses. And how many more attack vectors have you just created by moving those people into their homes? Where their desktop is sitting unlocked for an hour because they got up and went to get some lunch, and they have a house cleaner in the house that's punching buttons, or they have their kids that are, like zooming pictures of themselves out, or whatever the case may be, right? That these are the kind of things that become more and more as we move forward into the work from home as being the normal, because there's a lot of companies that are saying they're not going to put a lot of people back in offices. They're going to allow them to continue to work from home. That's, schooling from home, all of these different things. And yeah, there's this huge potential, and it's always going to come down to training people, because human error is one of the biggest potential threats in residential or in network attacks, right? So clicking on something that you weren't supposed to click on, so on and so forth. And then what are the services that we can create and the products that we can provide that will actually allow somebody to have some level of convenience while still having a level of protection that makes sense for their lifestyle.
Yeah,
it's a very difficult thing to find, and there's no magic bullet. There's no one thing you just put your finger on it and say that's the thing.
Right.
It takes some time. So, in some respect, we say bear with us, because it does take some time to figure this stuff all out.
Yeah, and it's constantly evolving, of course.
Right. Yeah.
Which is fantastic. Let's change topics real quickly before I let you go. One of the things that in not only the press release, but also just the way you guys have have managed this transition that I absolutely love is you're not the only one who got a promotion. Obviously, we're talking to you, and again, congratulations. But there's a group of people that are moving up and that are adding on. Talk for a minute about how essentially effective but also encouraging it is to be able to not only move up yourself, but see others within the company continue to grow and excel.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the most rewarding parts of being in some type of leadership position in the company, whether it's this level or a level 2 levels ago or whatever it is. When you see people that come in and they've made an obvious difference in the performance of the company and how we work and what the benefits are and they've come into the company. A lot of times when we've brought them in just because of who they are. You take Alicia, Alicia well.
Yeah.
Take Alicia Henley as an example. She's not a ton of experience in residential and very little experience in networking as a whole. But look at her. I mean, she's killing it. She is a rock star on our team.
Totally. Yep.
And she's very visible in the market, and she has deserved she deserves the accolades and the respect that she gets. And she's a top-notch person, and that's what we look for over anything else is top-notch people. If somebody's intelligent and a go-getter and has a never say die attitude kind of thing, and is focused on details, you can train them to do a lot of things, with the right people and we feel like we have that foundation already created. So it's really about the people more than it is about what they're doing. And we've had several people in the company that they weren't in the right position. And we look at that person and we go, okay, so what we know about them is they can do this, this, and this. So what can they do for Access Networks? Because we don't want to lose the person.
Mm-hmm.
We want to put them in a place where they can contribute, empower them to be better, empower them to make a difference, empower them to feel fulfilled, to do all of those things. And we've made those transitions. We've moved people around because we don't want to lose the person. And I think that's the fulfilling part about being in leadership is making sure that when you're looking back at all the people that you've brought on over the years, that you're saying, okay, those people have made a huge impact and they feel fulfilled and they feel like part of the culture and they feel rewarded by the fact that the company has given them the opportunities that they've needed to do and thrive that way. So that's more rewarding to me than a lot of the other things that we do as a company. The sales figures and all that thing are great to pay the paychecks, but seeing people succeed is a great thing. So
I will say that, again, having followed the company for years, that is, as much as you've had fantastic success as a network company, the leadership principles and the way in which as a company you guys work has just been fantastic to watch. And
thank you.
Again, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for spending a minute with us. Again, congratulations. And we're looking forward to everything else that Access Networks is going to do in the future.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it.
All right, gentlemen, let's go to the panel. Today with me are two of my best friends. I think I can call you that, whether you feel the same way or not. I don't care.
You're my least favorite Canadian. I'll give you that.
Perfect. That gentleman right there is probably, I've known you longer than I've known Uncle Richie, which is shocking.
Yes, but I've known Uncle Richie longer than I've known you. Me and Uncle Richie are OG AVNation people.
I know you guys are OG. That man right there is Bradford Ben. He's the principal advisist at the Advisus Group. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you.
I got to say, Tim, I'm going to say something and Mitchell, make sure you record this. That interview that Tim did was really insightful. I don't even think we can add to that at all. It was right on the money.
Nothing. The other gentleman with us, as Mr. Bradford alluded to, is Uncle Richie, Richard Fergosa. He's the principal at Fergosa Design. How you doing, Richie?
Mellow West Coast self-quarantine greetings. I actually just got back from Bradford's coast, and so glad to be on. And yes, Brad and I are OG, and you're absolutely one of my best friends, no matter what anybody says about you, Matt. So.
Oh, thanks, buddy.
I didn't say he wasn't my best friend. I just said
long.
He's the Canadian I liked the least, which is saying a lot.
Well, yeah, but I also know who I'm up against. So
Yeah, you're up against Brock.
yeah, I
and
take that as a loss
Ninja
any day. Yeah,
and Patricia.
yeah. No, I get it 100%. Before we kick into a couple more stories, I do want to touch real briefly and send our condolences to the Crestron family, heck, the industry family as a whole, over kind of the holiday break. Crestron lost Fred Borghetzi. I had met Fred a couple of times. I was not close with him by any means, but I can honestly say he was one of the nicest people I've ever met within the channel. Rich, I know you went back a ways with Fred. This is a huge loss. There's a huge loss to obviously Crestron, to Fred's family, of course, but really to the industry.
It's a huge loss to anybody who knew him. Fred is one of those special people that come across your life, and to mix together that amount of brilliance and that amount of humility in his brilliance. I mean, he just, if you didn't know Fred and if you didn't know what Fred did, you would never, just looking at him, he's just so unassuming. And I mean, I go back with Fred to, I want to say 1991 was the first time that I met Fred. He was a trainer at the time. This is back in the day where at Crestron, they still had single extensions in the old days. And he was my very first Crestron trainer, my very first class that I took, my first Crestron class that I took. And he swore up and down every single time that I told this story that it didn't happen. But I am saying it here. I'm saying it again. The truth is sometimes stranger than fiction. He's the only person who's ever thrown me out of a classroom as well. So I was a 21-year-old punk kid. He wasn't that much older than me. And this was in the days when we would have our training classes in hotel conference rooms, and we didn't have laptops then. So this was table upon table upon table, rows of monochrome computers set up, all still running MS-DOS. And me being the 21-year-old kid that I was at the time, I got bored halfway through the class. And so rather than actually focusing on the information that Fred was providing, I was going to everybody's computer. And in the old days, in the DOS days, there were little, I guess you'd call them Easter eggs now, but hidden in the program, there used to be these little commands that would launch stuff that, the guys who wrote the operating systems were funny. And there was one called gorilla.bat. And if you typed that in, it launched a game where it was two gorillas on skyscrapers next to each other, and you typed in coordinates basically, and you flung bananas at each other. And so during the middle of this Crestron class, while he's trying to maintain order, I'm running around to everybody's computers and I'm turning on this game, and then you're hearing the ding, 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 doo, doo, doo. So yeah, he threw me out. However, it was before lunch, and I guess he had a change of heart, because at lunch, I guess I was contrite enough, and he let me come back in. But that is always what I will remember about Fred. And like I said, I've told this stories for decades. And he'd look at me, he's like, that didn't happen. I'm like, dude, how could I make something like that up? But I mean, and there's been such amazing testimonies to his life. I mean, the side of Fred that I knew was always through Crestron and through my different iterations of my career. We didn't always talk that often, but when we did, it was great. It was just Freddie. I mean, for me, he was just Freddie. He was Freddie Borghetzi. And at the same time, I understand how everybody else knew Fred Borghetzi, CTO, knew the driving force behind the engineering. And he was such a quiet driving force of what Crestron is now. And to say that he isn't, would be a disservice. But I mean, the testimonies that Julie J. Gibson wrote, Todd Puma wrote one. I mean, all of the outpouring, it doesn't even scrape the surface of the impact that he made. And it made on me. And, I mean, I'm really going to miss him. I knew he was sick, but it just, at 53, you just don't expect that, as a 50-year-old man myself, and if nothing else, I guess, the the legacy that he left and the impact that he makes. I mean, not many people get to make that kind of impact like he did. And, you know, I mean, it was definitely an honor and a privilege to know Freddie.
Yeah, very much so. All right, gentlemen, let's move on to our kind of second story of the day. This comes to us from CE Pro: How Remote Work Can Help Solve the Challenge of Hiring AV Talent. This is actually the perfect story to have both of you on for, because this is, to a degree, kind of what you both do now. Through the story, they go through and talk to Pro AV Systems out of Massachusetts on their quest to find some qualifying design engineers, and how they were able to source that remotely, and working through the benefits and the challenges of that. Brad, let me start with you on this, Bradford. When you see this, you're someone who, if you don't know Bradford, one, get to know Bradford, but two, you've had a long history within the Pro AV community. You've done stuff on a level that's a short list. When you see this, now that you've started your own consultancy and you're helping firms with design and with really just how to do this business properly, what are the pitfalls to look for and to overcome when you go to outsource either an individual or a company to remotely hire them?
Well, I want to be careful here, because the article's talking about remote working and outsourcing, and the two are different. I understand the slips, no problem, but both have the same requirements. There are some slight differences. Mm-hmm. And one of the advantages I had, or disadvantages, take your pick, when I was working at my previous employer, you know, for many years, for about 5 years, none of my coworkers worked in the same building as me. One was in Michigan, one was at the Martin factory in Denmark, one was in LA, one was at that point, they were in Lakeland, Florida, one was in Salt Lake City. We were literally all over the world. And we were, quote unquote, collaborating online, which to me is no different than working remotely. Mm-hmm. That's what we did. I think the bringing people on remotely is something that's a little overdue. And I'm not going to say it's a good thing that came out of the pandemic, but I think it forced the migration to understanding that technology workers, and with the right technology, you can work anywhere. Because as I said on Chris Netto's AV in the AM yesterday, I was on the road 75% of the time for about 10 years. So I was a road warrior working remotely, not calling it working remotely. But I think it comes down to a couple things to make it successful that companies are now starting to embrace that are what required for this. I think it's a good thing because what it means is that you can now, as a integrator, you can hire the best talent you can get. You know, if I wanted to hire a good guy to help me fix my microwave that's not talking correctly, and knowing that I'm putting the popcorn in, I'm going to call Uncle Richie. He's in San Francisco, but we have technology to be able to work it. You know, so I think it's proving that you can now get the right person for the job no matter where they are, which is a good thing. But the other thing I think is we as an industry and as companies are starting to understand these tools and how to use them properly. Mm-hmm. I think the advantage of working distant is huge. I live in Florida. Cost of living for me is a whole lot cheaper than it is for you up in London, Ontario, Canada, as well as for Richard out in San Francisco. So all of a sudden it becomes more practical to be able to hire someone that way. But the other thing I think that's going to happen as a result of this is beyond the pool being able to work, it's going to be better for families. And this sounds weird being that I don't own any kids, you know, it's just me and Jennifer in the house and that's it. Is now you don't have to do I would love to take the job, but I want to wait until the kids get out of school. Mm-hmm. Or, you know, we can't afford to move because of my sister-in-law, but doesn't matter. You have the ability to telecommute. You can work remotely. I think this is showing people that's possible, and people are understanding it's not as big of a leap as they used to think it was. Now, there are still some challenges to be overcome. And I'm going to use some of our AVNation meetings. I know it's kind of inside pool, but I'm still going to use them as an example of all of us. When we have AVNation stuff, we all get online in a meeting, even though some people are in the same location as Tim. But having two people in one room and one person in another room doesn't work. Having every person remote and on the phone as an equal footing works. And I think those processes are coming, and little stuff like I have a document cam at home now so I can review drawings. Everyone's starting to get tools. I think it's a great thing for the industry. It allows people to be the best person, and all of that great stuff, to find the right person for the job and not do this is what's in my area. It allows people to take jobs without having to move for whatever reason, but it also allows, like the way I'm setting up the Advisist, is it allows just hire me as you need me, and then I can go away and another company can hire me as I need me. And it allows people, I don't want to say gig economy, because that's not what this is. It's project-based work. Yep. And it allows companies to scale. So I think it's an overall great thing that for us in the residential market, I think where it starts to come in is that integrators can start doing if you're going to be working from home, you're going to need an overhead document cam. You might want better lights. You might want a better green screen. You might want a camera that does better focusing than using your inboard one, maybe a better microphone, some noise proofing, all that type of stuff. So it's a growth industry for the home and residential, but it's also just a growth industry overall, because now you can hire the right person no matter where in the world they are, which is actually kind of an amazing thing.
It really
and
is.
then that was a rant, but I let Richie tell his story, so I had to go on. But I do want to know something. Were there bananas served at lunchtime?
Oh, that would have been awesome. main plate.
Richie, when you see this is something that, and I'm aware that there is a difference between hiring someone to work for you remotely full-time versus part-time versus subcontracting to someone. But I think the challenges of bringing on someone who is remote, whether it's a temporary basis or a full-time basis, those are pretty similar. We split hairs a lot on that one. As someone who has done this for years, heck, back when I met you, you were already doing this. You were coming in as a hired gun to solve problems. In the commercial space, this is a little bit more commonplace, but in residential, a lot of firms take the approach, as Bradford alluded to, of, hey, we need everyone in-house, we need everybody here, and it's a smaller team, so they very rarely are going out to look for someone to fit that. How do you ensure that when you do go out to find someone, that you find the right fit and the level of trust is there?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, you both alluded to, kind of the point that I was going to make, which was this is commonplace in commercial. It's just how you do business, how you scale. Sometimes you get a project, there's just flat enough, not enough bodies to get the job done. And so in the commercial industry, whether it's ed tech, whether it's government, whether it's corporate, any of those, you got 150 boardrooms you got to deploy on, on a tight schedule. You just physically need bodies. And so, pro companies have always seen that as just a method to be able to deliver. However, and I will say that, it's kind of the unknown. It's kind of the known but unspoken, is that generally documentation in the pro industry is a lot better than the residential industry. And so
not so fast.
Generally, again, now I thrive in, and I've made a business on helping companies get from the drawings on a napkin to, a spec that can be delivered and deciphered and maintained and revised and archived. But with Resi, you are typically dealing with smaller companies. and you're dealing with guys who are kind of jack of all trades, right? You know, they're the CEO, they're the installer, they're the programmer, they're X, Y, and Z. And so the problem sometimes for these companies is not that they don't want to hire out or get assistance, is that they can't get them the information to get the project done because it's held in somebody's brain, or it's, you know, tightly knit between the on-site field manager and the owner of the company, or somebody who does sales. So it's a logistical issue, really, which is, okay, you know, we have all of these resources available to us, but we don't have the tools to be able to get them to succeed. And so I think what, and so
the same thing happens in the commercial industry. This is, I think this is every branch, but please go on.
It's the maturation of the industry, though, is that we need to get to that point.
Absolutely. I mean, you should be able to, as a company, as an integrator, to be able to have a field commissioning packet, however you put it together, that allows someone with the technical competency, you know, and you've got high level techs and you've got entry level techs and everything in between, but the minimum competency level to perform a task, to be able to, you know, pre-wire from location A to location B, to be able to hang a display, to be able to label the wire appropriately so that when it is terminated back at the head end. I mean, these are all, again, they should be common sense kind of things, but in the day-to-day running businesses, you know, I mean, again, we always talk about the theoretical, you know, this is the best case scenario, how it should happen, X, Y, and Z. But there's the real world, and there's lots of guys out there that are struggling. And so they're just trying to get paid, and they're just trying to get the work done. And it's just them, and they're balancing 15 other things, and they're overwhelmed. So this is more a matter of saying, hey, it's okay. Everybody's in this same boat. You know, you don't have to feel bad for admitting it, and that there are services out there available who will make life easier for you. And the hardest time is, you know, sometimes, especially in Resi, gosh forbid that ego gets involved, and, you know, the idea that they're doing it better than everybody else. And so I view it as a way that it's a little bit more transparency, and that's a good thing, you know. And again, like I was talking about, you know, humility in business, it's the hardest and the most liberating part of maturing as a company, is that humility, to be transparent, that it's okay to collaborate and get help.
Yeah, very good. All right, gentlemen, let's wrap this up real briefly. This is CES week, and nothing has really dropped yet due to our recording time, but LG is planning to demo their first QNED mini LED TV. Blah, 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 blah. This comes to us from Residential Tech Today. If you haven't heard of QNED, this is a combination of quantum dot and nanocell technology, where they're going to use a mini LED as the light source. This is supposed to have better brightness and contrast that are far superior to conventional LCD TVs, and likely better than OLED. Uncle Richie, I'm going to come back to you real quick. This is obviously, as I mentioned, the start of CES week, the start of launching, hopefully a bunch of new cool technologies, including this one. LG is already at kind of the peak of kind of quality as well as cost when it comes to their OLED line of panels. Is the new QNED going to be just a showpiece for them, or is this something that you see being commonplace fairly quickly?
It's 2021. Richie's muted.
Oh gosh, I'm sorry. I thought you were talking to Brad and not me. I'm sitting here going, Brad's got a great thing.
It was like just like being on a meeting again. See, remote working and having these shows are the same. Would you like me to talk for you, Richie, and you can talk for me?
I would love for you to talk for me, Brad, because I'm sitting going, this is your wheelhouse. And I'm just like kind of sitting here going, I can't wait to hear what Brad's going to say.
You did start with Richie, right,
I
Matt?
did 100%.
Okay. I heard Brad
hey,
first.
Hey, Richard.
That's fine. So I'll start.
I'm sitting here going, this is going to be fascinating.
Bradford, same question.
Okay. So let me start. First, I want to say, and this is not an insult to residential technologies, 100% not. This is the least informative press release I have seen in weeks, months, if not years.
This is also the start of CES, right?
The start of CES.
That's what they
and I
do.
understand that, but I also think
Smoke
it's
and
one of these
mirrors to
things.
start.
It's the start of CES. So we're not there. So your press release better tell us what we're missing. But I'm not blaming residential tech. It's one of those things where after I read this article, I had to then go back and dig through notes and look at stuff, etc. I think the concept is good. I think the concept is interesting. I think it's probably going to be a year or two away. And I think the whole, we can do an 8K TV with it, or sorry, an 8K display. No one uses TVs. I'm showing my age now. Is going to be interesting because at 86 inches, which is their currently largest size, that's like 1 pixel per pixel, which is nice and great resolution, but how far away from the display do you need to be? So that's a whole nother story. But I think this move is good because it's going to help with the color space. And I've become a color space snob recently. I'll be the first to admit it. I learned about it. I got to see it in action. Rec 2020 versus P3 versus Adobe RGBS. We can talk all about that stuff. And it's red, green, blue spectrum if you're curious, since I used an abbreviation. But as you go through all that, I think this is going to be a big move because you're going to have a high contrast, good color depth, all of that. What I'm interested in is just how great the black is going to be, because they're saying they can do 1,000,000 to 1 on the color ratio.
Yeah, which is
and
insane.
they're going to have 2,500 dimming zones. I'm like, well, that's going to be pretty impressive, but I'm not sure it's going to be able to keep up. The other thing I'm very worried about with this technology is how well the latency is going to be set between audio and video with all of that processing time. For those of you who aren't watching, I did my bad Godzilla impersonation, but I do think that's something. I do think that the idea of going to that integrated surface is going to be good.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's going to allow some economy of scale for them because they can almost cut a piece of glass to size and still have the LEDs and the pixels they need. I think it's a nice next step. I'm going to be very interested to see how well it lives and expands, because I'm not sure it's not going to have dimness issues, and how are they going to do color calibration and brightness calibration across that many pixels if they're mini LEDs.
Yeah.
I also think it's another one of those things that looks and sounds really great, kind of like OLED and transparent OLED and flexible OLED. And not all of those have shipped yet or been affordable. But I'm interested to see what it's going to do. I do like the idea of that it's smaller and maybe more efficient. Maybe it's not. I'm interested to see the color speed, and I'm interested to see the off speed. And this is one of those things where I miss a live show, because no matter how we look at it on YouTube, you're getting YouTube compression and then looking at it on your own screen. So it's not going to be the same. I think the technology is there. I think Samsung and other companies are going to be right behind them. I think the move is great. They're saying they can do with a refresh rate of up to 120 hertz. Yeah, that's pretty impressive.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also wondering if that's a limitation, because QLED and some of these other ones can do 240. So I don't think it's going to be a command and control display. It's a home residential display. And I think you might get to a point where the Blu-ray or other source might be better than it. And at the same time, it might reveal the compression if you're streaming.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a good thing. I think it's got a lot of potential ads. I'm just kind of interested to actually see it, if that makes sense.
100%. It's a display. You kind of have to see it. I'm really glad you brought up Samsung because it meant that I didn't have to. Richie, one of the things that I've dealt with, and I'm sure every other integrator who works in Resi has dealt with, is the debate between OLED and QLED from Samsung. And depending who you talk to, there are pluses and minuses on both sides, and one is better than the other, again, depending who you talk to. What I find interesting about this is LG has obviously been a huge proponent of OLED, and they have downplayed, shall we say, quantum dot for quite a while. They're now using quantum dot. And to contrast this, Samsung is expected to announce a Neo QLED as well this week, which is their version of essentially quantum dot and a small, they don't say mini, but a small LED.
Micro LED, shall we say?
Yes, micro LED. And if I'm reading between the lines, it's some of the technology that's in the wall is coming into an actual traditional panel size. This hits a point to me of, as Bradford said, you have to see this to see the quality level. We know there's a lot of limitations when you surpass 4K and get into 8K and get into some of these things that the human eye can discern. At this point, are we going to be there to where side by side, yeah, they look good, great, let's just spend money?
It's kind of the luxury watch debate at that point. Here's how I view it, and again, I think we're almost getting to the point where it's kind of the fatigue is starting to set in again with the display technology. We had, no pun intended, quantum leaps in display technology at 5-year clips, 5 to 7 year clips. But at this point, begun the mini LED wars have. Brad made one specific statement that pretty much nails all of it. Streaming.
Mm-hmm.
So it's phenomenal that we've got these specs of what the technology can do, but we're not using physical media, or we're not using local media necessarily to push these displays. In fact, what we wind up doing with these displays, like Brad was saying, is that we may be pointing out the inefficiencies in it. It's like saying you've got a great sounding MP3. Well, yeah, it's still an MP3. It's not a live performance. And so, let's put it this way. Remember when we first started going to 4K, people hated the soap opera effect, right? But that was close. Peter Jackson's, when Peter Jackson had changed how his format was when they were recording in red, and people started seeing, the video of it, and they hated it because it was completely foreign to how they viewed the material up to that point. And I think that's what we're running into. I mean, for me, I look at it as, in performance space, in live, yeah, I mean, push the boundaries of it. That's where all of a sudden it starts making sense. But now that you're coming into the residential arena again, we have to take into account a very significant way that we now consume this content. And the reality is streaming's here. I've got clients who, I'll sit there and I'll go over the pros and cons of the quality of the physical media, or, a company like Kaleidoscape or any of those. But I can't gloss over the fact that I know that they're going to wind up using their set-top boxes, or they're going to use an Apple TV, or they're going to use a Roku, or they're going to use any of the 50 new on-demand for $4.95 a month services that are out there. So we're heading into this really weird fragmentation again. And the problem with it is that there are no standards in terms of how it's being delivered. You're seeing all of these ads for all these new streaming services. Not a single one of them has ever touted the picture quality of the stream. It's just, we've got 55 channels for this, and we've got specialized this and that. Well, that's great. But realistically speaking, you're not necessarily going to see the difference in that content coming through with a model from last year and these new models coming in. I mean, are there performance enhancements? Absolutely. Are there going to be long-term technology advancements? But as an early adopter, doesn't make sense. I mean, there's always going to be early adopters, and they're going to, I mean, you're always going to have somebody who wants bigger, better, faster. But we're, like I said, we're reaching that saturation point where, for me, I have a hard time making those recommendations, because I'm looking at it going, people are asking me, I'm like, I don't know, because I'm looking at what you normally watch, and chances are, I know that 3 of your kids are sitting there watching it on their phones. So how am I going to advise you to use this screen when I know that you may not even use it? And so, it's been, again, it's the value proposition of these displays, of these fixed panel displays. I mean, you could buy a 65-inch TV for like $250. Imagine saying that 15 years ago.
Imagine saying that 3 years ago.
3 years ago, yeah.
Well,
Imagine
actually,
saying that in Canada.
Yeah.
I do want to ask you a question, Mr. Fregosa. So for those of us who remember mastering and digital transfers and all that, do you think that this new technology is going to result in better mastering and conversion practices? I'll use an example and see what you think. So for those of us who are old and remember when Star Wars originally came out on celluloid film, and then the Empire Strikes Back, and you had Palpatine with the darkness around his eyes that was done as a video effect. It looked great when it was projected. You look at it on a display. Yes, it was a VCR, but you looked at it on a display and you had these big black blotches against a gray background. It showed the difference between a projected medium versus an emissive medium, or reflective versus emissive. Do you think that this new technology is going to require more skill in the conversion, as well as more interaction between the display and the source? Because I'm like looking at this going, I remember when people were mastering for iTunes, different than Bandcamp, different than Zune, different than, the Rio player, and take your pick. At one point, Britney Spears' song was mastered. I forget the album, but this was like in 2005, came out in 227 different formats to match the hardware and the codecs and this country versus that. Do you think that these displays are going to drive that? And now your set-top boxes and your other displays are going to start going I have to compensate for this and do that. Or you think it's just, no one's going to care?
I think there's going to be filmmakers always who are going to look to preserve their art in the best way possible. I think that, again, if you're consuming a YouTube series or a Netflix series or a Hulu series or whatever the series du jour happens to be, I think that there are some out there from a content standpoint are committed to providing quality content. There's also just a lot of bad content out there these days too. And it's just, you're churning the stuff out. So, is there a definitive yes or no? No, I think that, again, for a filmmaker, I think it's going to be a great tool. I think absolutely, as you can remaster, as you can push the boundaries of, maybe your legacy portfolio. Anyway, we've seen it in some of these where, all of a sudden some of these services will basically say, yeah, we've upgraded you to UHD at no cost, because it didn't cost us much to perform this task. So that becomes the differentiator for them. These streaming services can charge an extra $3 a month for HD. Are there income opportunities? Yeah, but it all comes back to that. If there's income to be made for making the difference, yeah, they'll go for it. But if it's going to cost them and they can't recoup it, no, they're not going to do it.
Let's keep in mind that there will be some level of artistic expression that's taken. You take someone like James Cameron, who is incredibly particular about how he films and how his product is edited. And, I remember seeing something years ago when the Red camera came out, and he was talking about how he wanted to use it and how it had changed some of his workflow for, I don't remember what product it was that he was, what feature he was working on with that, but it had changed that format. And then you go back to, what was it, last year and a half ago, when episode 7 or whatever it was of Game of Thrones came out. And artistically, it was incredibly dark and shot darkly, and no one could see it because their TVs weren't calibrated to that type of content. So I think you're going to have a weird caveat where there are certain productions that will be or will take advantage of some of the new technologies. But again, it comes down to how they want to master. And if they're going to master in 4K for something that is going to be shown on 8K, that might look a little different than if they're mastering in 8K.
But at the same point, you can't take something that's mastered for 8K and play it on 4K and expect it to sound good. It's the whole thing with, you can't rip a CD and expect it to sound good in MP3.
No.
But I just want to know,
yes,
is the QNED, as I'm calling it, going to be more of a hit than Home 3D or less?
It'll depend on price point. I think it'll depend on price point. And if I can take kind of my media hat off for a minute and put on my Omega, I own an integration company hat.
I can take the show over. And
no, it's fine. We're to anyone who's still with us listening, it's because of these two guys and how long we go back that this is what happens. Sorry, Mitchell. We have a lot of clients that want OLED. They want that 98-inch LG OLED until they get a quote for it. And then they go, you know what, that Q60, that's, 75 inches at $2,000 looks amazing. Let's do that. It's like anything, and Richie alluded to it. The early adopters who just don't care, they will go buy whatever they want. I remember we were in Amsterdam last year, the last show we went to, and I was talking to some people from Samsung about the wall, and they were talking about a project that was going down where there was a large number of them going into a residence. There are people that don't care, and money is not an object. If they decide they want it, they will do it and they will go purchase it. So when it comes to QNED, knowing that we don't know sizes per se, we don't know cost, we don't know availability, because right now just availability in general is up in the air for every product if you haven't been paying attention. No idea when these are going to hit. No idea what price point they will come with. No idea what installation might look like. I think it has the potential to be a great hit, the same way 4K became a really big product for a lot of clients or for a lot of customers. I don't think it will be a blip the way 3D was. Because at the end of the day, 2 years, we may talk about a 4K TV the same way today we talk about a 720 TV.
I don't
two
disagree
years might be
with you.
2 years might be too soon, but I remember back when we started selling 1080p. I remember when we were selling 1080p cameras and how big of a stretch it was for people to buy broadcast 1080p, and they would just go to 720 because it was affordable.
And this is where residential and my experience in engineer or commercial changes, because I have worked on 16K, 32K and up displays, but I believe the technical term is frigging huge. I might be incorrect, but
that's the name of the show.
Yeah. But we have a wall, my former employer, Harman, has a wall at their experience center that is a 1 pixel to 1 pixel 4K wall. that is 1 point. I forget what the pitch is, but it's pretty small. And it's probably 16 feet by 9 feet.
Yeah.
Actually, it's bigger than that, but I'll just go with that for now. It's probably 18 feet by 32. And it's huge. And I'm looking at that going, you could double the density and I wouldn't be able to take it in. And we can look at some of the, other places of there are times where the size of the display cannot do the resolution justice.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't say that as a bad thing. I'm not saying 8K doesn't matter. I think 8K ingestion for content, so you can do a digital zoom to 4K, unbelievable.
It's fantastic.
But I think, at some point, if you look at an 8K display from 10 feet away, are you going to get the full benefit of the cost?
Yeah. Yeah. I think in the consumer world, it's just a little machine that keeps going.
So you think it's house jewelry. And I hate to use that term, but it's a term I use I need the 96-inch display because my neighbor has an 86-inch display.
The number of clients and other integrators I've talked to over the years who tell stories of their clients going and get a neighbor when their project is done so they can bring them downstairs and show off the Ferrari that's the media room, is you've heard that from everyone. Whether or not these new products, these new TVs are needed or warranted or a incredible upgrade over the existing display that's in the house may or may not matter. And down the road, as that cost comes down, like I still remember the first OLED I saw at NAB, at NAB. And it was a Sony, I want to say it was 14 inches. It was a calibration monitor. And it was something like 22,500. It was insane. Now you can buy that 98 for about 10 grand. It's a matter of time. But gentlemen, we should leave it there. Otherwise, no one will ever listen to my show again because it's so stinking long. Yes.
Maybe we could edit it up and do, what I should do is I should just take an offshoot of this and create my own show.
You should. And I should be your first guest.
I was going to have Richie as my first guest.
Well, that makes sense.
You can ask Richie if he'll have you on.
You can be the guy off to the side saying,
that's fine.
Okay. Oh, Bradford Ben's show.
Hey, I would be a good Higgins. I can play the Higgins role.
Okay. I'll think about it.
All right, gentlemen. Thank you so much. If you've stuck with us this long, thank you. Mr. Fregosa, if people want to connect with you, learn more about Fregosa Design, where can they do that?
Type my name into the interwebs. You can type in my name, Fregosa Design. You can find me on Twitter at rfregosa. But first and foremost, as I always say, the best place I hope you can find me is here on AVNation.tv on our suite of shows. Obviously here with you, my good friend Matt, but also we have our show on the control system automation industry called The State of Control with my very good friend Steve Greenblatt. And so come see us and obviously follow our supporters. So that's the best way.
Excellent. Mr. Ben, thank you so much, sir, for joining us. If people want to connect with you, learn more about Advisist, and if you are a residential firm, especially if you're trying to make inroads into commercial, get to know Bradford. He's really smart.
More than happy to help. I've done this before. So the first thing is you can find me at advisist.com. You can find me on the Twitters at Bradford Ben with 2 N's. You can find me in the Googles or the DuckDuckGo, which is my preferred search term, at Bradford Ben. Also, starting on the 13th of January, you can find me screaming at the Canadian hockey teams because NHL will start up again. And then, as we teased briefly during the show, come back to AVNation soon. In February, we're hoping I will be launching my show. Name is still being debated. I kid you not. Tim made the mistake of going, sure, what the heck? So there will be a Bradford show of some sort coming in February. So we'll definitely start that up. The look forward to that. And of course, don't forget, swing back by AVNation. You cannot vote for me for AV Professional of the Year, mainly because Tim said I was ineligible because I'm an owner or something.
And you'd
But
beat everyone.
I
let's be
know.
honest. It
But
wouldn't even be fair.
go there, take a look, vote for who you want to. It's definitely something great. We want to make this a people's choice, so to speak, so that we have the people's champion, not to be confused with The Rock.
No.
But we do want to have the people's champion up there, as well as some great products in there. And of course, now that the Bears have been eliminated, I guess we can stop talking about Tim's Bears.
There's a shock.
But so with that, definitely appreciate the time. You had all sorts of places to be. We hope we added a little levity to your life for this past hour or so. But yeah, Matt, what do you got to wrap up with?
Just the standard wrap up. Thank you again for joining us today. If you'd like to connect with me, you can find me on Twitter at Matt D. Scott and pretty much every other social platform. But more importantly, please visit avnation.tv, where you'll find this show as well as a wide variety of our other shows with all the verticals that we cover. When you visit the website, please take a moment to check out our supporters. We are extremely thankful for their support and ask that you support them as well. Thanks again for watching. That's all the time we have for this episode of ResiWeek.